In the dead of night, a truck arrives in Slaughterville, a small town curiously named after its windowless slaughterhouse. 7 mysterious kids with suitcases step out of the vehicle and into an abandoned home on a dead-end street, looking over their shoulders to make sure they aren't noticed. When timid and lonely Ravani Foster covertly witnesses their arrival from his bedroom window, he is eager to learn everything he can about his new neighbors. What secrets are they hiding? And most mysterious of all, where are the adults? Amid this shadowy group of children, Ravani finds an unexpected friend in the warm and gutsy Virginia. But with this friendship comes secrets revealed and danger. When Ravani learns of a threat to his new friends, he must fight to keep them safe, or lose the only person who has ever understood him. Here is a preview of The Midnight Children by Dan Gemeinhart. Nearly all of Slaughterville was sleeping when the children came. There was no sign welcoming visitors to Slaughterville because most of the town's visitors were cows, and none of them were particularly happy to be there. They were even less happy when they left. But on this particular night, there were visitors. They arrived quietly, fingers crossed that they would not be noticed, and for the most part, they weren't. The town was dark except for the silver of the moonlight. In the little block of buildings on Skinister Street that Slaughterville called downtown, the sheriff was in her office, but her feet were up on her desk, her head thrown back, eyes closed and mouth open, dreaming along to the opera music soaring from the record player spinning beside her. Next door, Mr. Chin, the baker, was awake. He could have seen the children pass by, but he was bent over, sliding yet another great round sourdough loaf into the oven, and missed them just. All the other shops and stores stood dark and empty. The bell watched silently from the church tower at the end of the block as the children rolled through town on Skinister Street and out the other side. The windowless slaughterhouse that gave the town its name was still, its machinery quiet, its blades idle but waiting, the killing floor hosed clean and empty. Moonlight glinted on the steely points of the dangling meat hooks. Cows dozed behind the fences in the muddy stock pens, not wondering even a little bit about what awaited them the next day, which was probably for the best. Just past the slaughterhouse, the truck clattered over the narrow bridge that crossed Carcass Creek. It took the first left turn after crossing the bridge, its headlights flashing for a second on a tilting sign marked Awful Road. There were only 2 houses on Awful Road before it dead-ended into the woods. Both of them were dark, and only one of them held living souls. The house on the left was empty, at least for the moment. And across the street in the house on the right, on the second story, a boy lay in bed. All around his window, which looked out on the street, were birdhouses. Dozens of them, all shapes and sizes and colors. The boy had made them all. That boy is the hero of this story, or rather, one of the heroes. No one would have been more surprised to hear that than the boy himself. He was about as far from a hero as anything he could imagine. Sometimes, though, a soul doesn't know how great it truly is until it has to find out. The boy's name was Ravani Foster. Ravani's mother and father were asleep, but he was not. He was staring at the ceiling, and he was crying. He'd been woken not by a sound or by a dream, but by a feeling so strong that it jolted him out of sleep and into darkness. The feeling that woke Ravani Foster on this moonlit night, it was loneliness. I don't know if you've ever been so lonely that it woke you up. I hope not. But isn't it interesting that this particular boy was woken on this particular night by that particular feeling when that exact truck was turning onto that exact road? It seems more than coincidence. It seems almost like magic, perhaps. This boy, woken by loneliness, heard something, a low, growly sort of rumble. He wiped the tears off his cheeks, got out of bed, and crept on quiet feet over to the window that looked down on Awful Road. A large white truck was parked in front of the empty house across the street. Ravani rubbed his eyes, not quite believing them. The truck made no sense. No one had lived in that house since old Mr. Croward had broken his hip and moved to Ironburg weeks before. And no one drove into Slaughterville at night because nothing happened in Slaughterville at night. But, nevertheless, there it was. The engine kept rumbling as a large and lumpy man stepped down out of the cab. A fat cigar glowed between his lips. He looked up and down the street, puffing smoke like a dragon. Satisfied with the silence, the man walked around to the back of the truck, undid a latch, and with a rattling clatter rolled the door up and open. Then he stepped aside and leaned against the truck, eyes back on Skinnister Street. Upstairs, Ravani watched, waiting, and then slowly his mouth dropped open, because out of the truck stepped children. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 children. The oldest, a dark-haired boy whose head swiveled to scan the moonlit street around them, looked to be 16 or 17 years old. The youngest, a yawning girl in a white dress, was only 5 or 6. The others, 2 girls and 2 boys, were somewhere in between. 6 children, stepping down into moonlight without making a sound. Each carried a suitcase. The youngest girl held a ragged stuffed giraffe in one hand, but they had no furniture, no lamps, no mattresses, no chairs. 6 children appearing out of nowhere, alone, together. No, wait. As Ravani watched, one more child emerged from the blackness of the truck, a girl about his own age, 12 or 13. She stood for a moment in the back of the truck, looking around at Awful Road. Her hair, which was tied back with black ribbon, looked silver in the moonlight, but Ravani thought that in sunlight it would look gold. She wore blue jeans and a white t-shirt. One hand held a suitcase, just like the other children, but the other held something else, a white umbrella. The lacy, pretty kind that fancy ladies carried at fancy events like horse races and country picnics. A parasol, Ravani whispered, thinking that was the right word, and it was. The girl twirled the parasol over her shoulder. She looked left, and then she looked right, and then she looked up. For a breath, Ravani was sure she was looking straight at him, standing shirtless in his window. He gasped and stepped back, although he knew that if she was looking at his window, he'd already been seen. But then her gaze dropped, and the older boy reached up to take her hand, and she stepped down onto the street. The man closed the back of the truck and climbed into the cab, and then the truck lurched into motion and grumbled away into the night, leaving the 7 soundless children behind. Together, 6 of them walked up the path to the covered front porch of the empty house across the street. Only the girl with the parasol stayed behind. Ravani watched her standing alone on the sidewalk, and as he watched, she set her suitcase down, and she wiped at her cheeks with the back of her hand, first one, then the other. Ravani bit his lip. He knew that motion well. It didn't matter that the girl was 2 stories down and a street away, or that the only light came from the moon, or that her back was turned to him. The girl with the silver hair was wiping away tears, and he didn't need to see them to know it. The other 6 children climbed the porch steps and set their suitcases down, facing the front door. They reached out and grasped one another's hands. The oldest boy said something. His voice didn't reach across the street and up to the window, but his mouth was moving, his head turning from side to side. The 5 children beside him lowered their heads, then said something as well. Then they picked up their suitcases, opened the front door, and disappeared inside. And this has been a preview of The Midnight Children.